Hello, boys and girls. We are gonna do playthrough. My name is George, and we are gonna play as the Sublime Ottoman State. Devleti Ali Osmaniye. Allah devletimize zeval vermesin. So, as you might have heard, I'm Turkish, and we are just gonna jump into this. I did not change any of the game rules. I won't talk too much. We'll just start with the game. So it's Kaiserreich Beta 15.2, leaving for Syria. So sure I will. Alright, so let us start with the research slots. Basic machine tools, construction 1, and electromechanical engineering, so pretty standard, isn't it? So before I start the game, we'll just take a quick look at the map. So if you watch this in 2 or 3 years' times, the map might have changed. So we are situated in the Middle East. We basically are the crumbling overlord of the Middle East. Yes, I'd like to explain a little bit what we want to achieve. So what we want to achieve is we want to strengthen inner politics and bring peace and stability to the Ottoman Empire itself. That includes the core territories, which are Tripoli, then we have Fezzan. So this here would be Fezzan if I'm not mistaken, and this is Cyrenaica. So yes, in the game this here is the Emirate of Cyrenaica, but in fact the Ottoman province of Fezzan would be this here, so these two provinces. Then, of course, the core territories of the Ottoman Empire, consisting of Anatolia. Oh yeah, yes. The naval screen shows this very good. So this is Anatolia, the very core of the empire. Then we have Rumelia. So Rumelia would be that's Turkish, and it means land of the Romans. So that's the European part of the empire. So Rumelia consists of Eastern Thrace, which is this part. Then we have, oh yeah, we can't click in the provinces, yes, because we are on the naval screen. So let me quickly change. We have Adrianople, or we also see Eastern Thrace to this. Then we have Western Thrace, which we have a claim and core on, and we have Karacali Vilayet, where we have a claim and core on. Then we have Anatolia, that is already ours. We have Mesopotamia, Syria. Then we have the Hijaz, which is basically this area. And we have the Trucial states, which are not really a core territory. You wouldn't consider them a classical core territory of the empire, but they still belong to us because we have won World War I in this scenario. Let me just quickly add, Hijaz would not be considered a core territory of the Ottoman Empire. But yeah, anyways. Then we have the dominions of the empire, or let's say the former dominions of the empire. That is Egypt and Sudan. That is Arabia, and in southern Arabia it is the state of Yemen, the Sultanate of Yemen. It is, however, not Muscat or Oman with its modern name. Then we have the Turkic states in Central Asia, so that would be Turkestan and today's Kazakhstan. They have never been part of the Ottoman Empire, but they are populated mainly by a Turkic population. We have the Caucasus consisting of Armenia, which is a dominion, a so-called emirate in the game. Sorry, yes, it's a vilayet. Sorry. Not an emirate. Then we have Azerbaijan, which is our brotherly state. They aided us in World War I. We liberated Azerbaijan in 1918. In 1918, the so-called Islamic Army of the Caucasus marched through Georgia to Baku and liberated it. So Azerbaijan was founded by the Ottoman Empire. But let me quickly say the Islamic Army of the Caucasus was led by Enver Pasha's, I think it was Enver Pasha's brother. But that was an army that consisted mainly of volunteers. A lot of them being Azeri. So what we want to establish is a puppet regime in Azerbaijan. If we can't, or Azerbaijan does not necessarily have to be a puppet regime, but could be an ally. I mean, they are our natural allies. Then we want to establish a puppet regime in Georgia, and in the best case, we install a puppet regime in the Don Kuban as well, because we want to have buffer states against the Russian Empire, or now Russian Republic. But I know, I'm pretty sure that the Russians are gonna be back. If possible, we want to create puppet regimes in the Islamic Federation of Turkestan as well, and in Eastern Turkestan. So we want to liberate the Turkish world. If possible, we want to liberate India as well, and create buffers around our empire. So, and this year, so our ultimate goal would it be to create buffer states in the Balkans against the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which are at the moment our natural allies, but that can change in time. So now that the war goals are set, I'd say we start the game. Oh my god, I've already spoken 8 minutes. So, do we want to start with the focus tree? No. Let us start by reading out what the devs have written. Alright, so the Ottoman Empire before the Weltkrieg. The Ottoman Empire, once one of the greatest empires in history, saw its decline commence in the late 18th century, developing to the point of being known as the sick man of Europe by the early 20th century. An inability to effectively industrialize, constant foreign meddling in its affairs, and a troubling hold on a lot of its provinces meant that the Ottoman Sultanate had fallen back well behind the European powers by 1876. Nonetheless, the Ottomans reformed, and despite the issues these period on a local level were tribal issues, and a corrupt bureaucracy reigned supreme. Light could be seen. Prompted by Mahmud no, that was not Mahmud III, it was Mahmud II. I'll have to file that as a bug. Prompted by Mahmud II in the early 19th century, and further pursued by the young Ottomans, radical changes were introduced in the empire. Land ownership was restructured, the Janissaries eradicated, central rule established in regions such as Mosul and Al-Hassa, and the constitution promulgated. The focus of these reformers were based on the idea of Ottomanism and attempted to foster a common identity for all of its inhabitants besides their local one. It would not be enough with it would not be enough. Oh my God! With Abdulhamid II's rise to power, a change would come once more. So, just a very quick history lesson here. So, Mahmud II introduced basically the first decrees which would give the right of land ownership to people and the right to go to courts against the state. So basically, he introduced coded law. And that is, that's a milestone. And then he reorganized the structure, the administration of the Ottoman Empire from the eyalet system. So, like, you could say states within the state. Don't know whether that's, I think it's pretty much like a US state, to something called vilayet, that is a province that's more like a French province, or today Turkey still has this vilayet system. They are now called il, but there basically is a governor from the central government in the capital. Yes, who is the highest local authority in the respective vilayet. And if anyone is interested in Ottoman history, you can read it. This decree is called Gülhane Hattı Hümayun. So that means Imperial Decree of Gülhane. Gülhane is a quarter on the historic peninsula of Constantinia, today's Istanbul. It's very beautiful, by the way. If you haven't been there, you should really go to Istanbul. I know it very well. It's a very beautiful city, very rich in history, a lot of Greek history. There's a lot of Greek influence. Fun fact, by the way, the population of Constantinia was, until I think 1934, had a non-Muslim majority. So I think it changed only in 1934 that the Muslims outnumbered the Christians. So in fact, when Istanbul belonged to the Ottoman Empire, before the Ottoman Empire collapsed, Constantinia was always a mainly Christian city, but, and this is maybe the most interesting thing about it, it was always the most loyal city. So of course, I mean, well, the Christians living there, they were earning their money, their income, their wealth was based on the inner market of the Ottoman Empire, pretty much, or Ottoman interests were their interests. So, anyways, I'll continue. My God, I might give classes in Ottoman history. So, under the pretext of the Russo-Turkish War, the constitution was abolished and parliament was sent packing. So, this is actually not true. The constitution was never abolished. İlber Ortaylı, Professor Dr. İlber Ortaylı, published something on that. So, Abdülhamid II never abolished the constitution. The constitution was just so weak that he could basically reign like an absolute monarch, closing the parliament, never reopening it, but that was all perfectly constitutional. So everything he did was perfectly constitutional. He just never reopened the parliament. So he closed the parliament, never reopened it, and basically had absolute powers with that. So that was due to a very weak constitution. I already fired this as a bug, I think. Anyways. This period saw a radical centralization of power under the figure of the Sultan Caliph. With a constant threat by Christian powers, the Sultan turned towards pan-Islamism based on the prestige of the Caliphate. Despite enjoying great success from the Muslim population, this would only hasten the departure of the territories without these. Furthermore, his absolute rule fostered great discontent amongst a population which increasingly became familiar with Western ideas. This resistance would consolidate itself in the shape of the Committee of Union and Progress. A coup d'etat in 1908 made Ottoman politics, long suppressed by the Sultan, burst into the open. Dozens of parties would attempt to find a seat within the newly restored parliament, as it seemed that the Ottoman decline was finally at its end. The United Democratic Forces would not last and quickly saw a split between the decentralists and the centralists. Through a tumultuous 5 years, these two sides will battle for control. In 1913, with a raid on the Sublime Porte, the game was up. By the way, the Sublime Porte, named Baba Ali in Turkish, is the Sublime Porte itself is the I think acronym, if that term is correct. I think it's the acronym for the Ottoman government. Actually, Baba Ali is a port to the it is also in the Fatih neighborhood of Istanbul. And it leads to the Sadaret Konağı. So the Sadaret Konağı is the office of the Grand Vizier. So the Grand Vizier would be the head of the government. So that's basically the Prime Minister. So if you speak of the Sublime Porte, you mean the Ottoman government, because the Sublime Porte is the port to the office of the Prime Minister. You can Google it. Just Google Sublime Porte. Looks very beautiful, by the way. The game was up. The centralists, with as significant public figures the three pashas, would eradicate all remaining power of the decentralists and shape the nation in their image. Under great threat by the imperialists, they ultimately strengthened ties with Germany. So that's also a little bit incorrect, because the Ottoman government already had strengthened ties with Germany. So that's something Abdülhamid Sani already did. Abdülhamid II did. Right, so interesting. The Ottoman Empire during the Weltkrieg. The Ottoman Empire officially entered the Weltkrieg on October 29, 1914, with the arrival of Wilhelm II with the Goeben and the Breslau and the shelling of Odessa. The Ottomans won several significant victories in the early years of the war, such as the Battle of Gallipoli and the Siege of Kut. But there were setbacks as well, such as the disastrous Caucasus campaign against the Russians. Disaster continued in 1916 with the start of the Arab Revolt, combined with a new British offensive under the commander of General Edmund Allenby. Coming to a head in 1918, devastating defeats in Palestine led to a mass retreat of Ottoman forces. Jerusalem, Damascus, and Aleppo fell in quick succession, as only the controversial decisions by the commander of the Sixth Army to withdraw into the mountains of Anatolia was able to stop the chain reaction. A valiant defeat at Antep and a Pyrrhic victory near Marash ultimately stopped Allenby in his tracks. So actually, the Arab Revolt itself was never successful. So I'll do this very quickly. Sorry, guys. So the Sharif of Mecca. So that's basically like, that is a government official of the Ottoman Empire. He'd be the custodian of the title custodian of the two holy cities belongs to the Sultan. But the Sharif of Mecca so basically the ruler of Mecca and Medina, the holy cities of Islam, said like, okay, I want to be king, and Lawrence of Arabia, that terrorist scum, said like, okay, come on, we'll create a unified Arabia under your rule. He was of Hashemite. He's from the Hashemite dynasty. The Hashemite dynasty, by the way, still rules in today's Jordan. So he would revolt against the Ottoman Empire, but this so-called revolt actually was never a popular revolt. So what they effectively did was they said like, okay, Arabs unite against the Ottoman Empire, against the Ottoman rule, against the Turkish rule, and the Arabs were like, no, fuck you, because we earn money from Ottoman rule, like so they didn't want to change the status quo. So what I mean, of course, if you have your income, if your income is saved by the current structure, you are very skeptical of any changes that would occur. So what they effectively did is they started paying mercenaries. So Lawrence, I think in the peak time, Lawrence got £300,000 or something like that from London in order to pay per day, in order to pay for the mercenaries. So what he did is he went to the tribes and said like, okay, here are weapons and money, like follow my revolt. So effectively he had Lawrence had a mercenary army, but well, the mercenaries would turn their back on Lawrence and his revolt if the Turks paid them more, and that in fact happened. So and secondly, in this I don't want to say more about the Arab revolt. The Arab revolt never spread to the basic Arab population. It was always tribes who did that, and it was always the tribe chiefs who were paid. All right. And by the way, they never had a military victory. They never had a significant military victory. So, in fact, the military victories in the campaign against the Ottoman Empire, they just started with the arrival of regular British forces. All right, so at the point, the atmosphere of the empire was rapidly changing as the Ottoman government realized that even a victory would come at a cost. Furthermore, a change had happened in the palace as well. The puppet Mehmed V had passed away. In his wake followed the far more assertive Vahdettin. Seeing the collapse of his empire on all fronts, and with the Kapp government held responsible for the disaster, he would lash out and attempt to shift power to his allies, the HIF, Hürriyet ve İtilaf Fırkası. With the ground heating up under their feet, Talat Pasha would then, at the instigation of Jamal Pasha, attempt to shut down the Sultan. Harsh famine in Istanbul due to refusal by German forces to supply it with Ukrainian grain, betrayal in the Caucasus by its allies, the attempted silencing of the Sultan, and rumors that the commander of the Sixth Army was in open conflict with the Ministry of War would finally tip the bucket over. In a massive wave of anti-German and pacifist fever, the cabinet of Talat Pasha was forced to resign and concede to the Sultan. Ahmet Tevfik Pasha was appointed Grand Vizier and tasked with the creation of a government of national unity. Under pressure from the Kapp, by the way, means Committee of Union and Progress, whose unwillingness to lift that grasp on power made the negotiations collapse. Ahmet Tevfik Pasha resigned and was replaced by Ahmet İzzet Pasha, creating a government consisting of Cavit Bey, Fethi Pasha and Rauf Pasha. It became quickly clear that the coup was far from defeated. So, by the way, the coup was... Well, anyways, I won't go into politics. Fuck that. The fall of Greece and the growing risk of revolution in the British Protectorate of Egypt caused Allenby to revise his strategy and withdraw part of his forces. As France collapsed in late 1919, the war entered its closing stages. In contrast with the Western Front, however, where Austrian forces pushed into Italy and Germans into France and Belgium, the Ottomans at this vital moment had lost over half of their empire, either occupied or readily vulnerable to a concentrated British attack, and were held up by a British force unlikely to stand down. Sultan Vahdettin opened negotiations with the British in an attempt to salvage what remained of his empire, whilst Britain reconsidered its attitude in the Middle East. In reality, in 1918, when the Ottoman delegation signed the Armistice of Mudros, that's Mondros Mutarikisi, it's called in Turkish. I don't know the exact English term. The British delegation was the British delegations had orders to sign basically anything the Ottomans would demand, because the British were burned out, and the British at that point didn't have the support in the political support. So if the Ottomans had demanded that the British would pull out all of their troops, they most probably would have done that. But, well, nobody in the Ottoman Empire could know that. With the Treaty of Copenhagen ceasefire later that year, demanding immediate withdrawal of all remaining Entente forces from the territory of the Central Powers, a rapid solution for the Eastern question was necessary. Further trouble for the British in Egypt, Afghanistan and occupied Iraq ultimately forced their hand, and the order was given to withdraw. Only Palestine and the Vilayet of Basra would remain under occupation at the insistence of Jan Smuts and Leo Amery until an acceptable treaty was reached surrounding the rights of its minorities, masking their intentions of an Indian base in Iraq and a fortified position near the Suez. With uncertainty in the political climate of the Ottoman Empire and punishment for the perpetrators of the Armenian massacres far from likely, international opinion shifted away from the empire, losing much of its support from the Central Powers. An accord was reached in the summer of 1920, wherein two autonomous regions were established, to great anger of both Turks and Arabs. The Mutasarriflik of Kudus, I don't know how to pronounce that in English, Mutasarrifat. So it's called Mutasarrif, alright? So the Mutasarrif of Jerusalem, MOG, so the Mutasarrifat of Jerusalem was created in Palestine, stretching from the Allenby Line to the Red Sea. This de jure part of the Ottoman Empire was to be governed by an international council consisting of the Ottoman Empire, British Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire, the USA and the Ottomans themselves. Forbidding the entry of Ottoman troops and international gendarmerie force would maintain the peace within Palestine. In the Vilayet of Basra, and a new home was created for the Assyrian people, whose exodus from the plains of Nineveh and the Lake Urmia had left them refugees in an Iran openly hostile to their ambitions. So, The Ottoman Empire after the Weltkrieg. As formal peace finally arrived in 1921, the borders of the Ottoman Empire had largely remained the same. The oblasts of Kars and Ardahan were recovered with the addition of Yerevan, whilst in the Aegean the Italians were pushed out of the Dodecanese. The damage had been immense, however, as through the actions of the CUP, especially Jamal Pasha, tangents between Turks and Arabs had burst into the open, whilst in eastern Anatolia and Mount Lebanon, whole populations were eradicated either through forced deportation or starvation. Losses on the Turkish side had been colossal as well, leading to underpopulation and sharp decline in agricultural output, the empire's main source of income. Although the Arab revolt had been a colossal failure, the need for reform was recognized. Answering to the Arab Congress of 1913, the Arabic language was recognized as the second language in the empire. Increasing factionalism within the CUP and the meteoric rise of many military figures tore away the internal stability of the party. The betrayal by its German allies in Palestine gave rise to a substantial anti-German faction. As public opinion of the party declined even further, the CUP changed its name to Tejedüt and openly ousted some of its dictatorial figures within. Jamal Pasha went packing whilst Talat's influence was greatly reduced. Working from his position as Minister of War, Mustafa Kemal Pasha ousted the German military mission and commenced an ambitious military restructuring. Receiving great acclaim for his actions, Kemal continued laying the foundations for his rise in power. Fearing another Enver Pasha, the upper committee of the party pushed Javed Bey forward as its leader. Incapable of successfully challenging him, Kemal made a successful bid for power in 1925. The party changed name its second time to the Ottoman People's Party. So there is, at the moment, there is the Cumhuriyet Halk Partisi, that means a Republican People's Party, so that's a play on it. And that's true, the Republican People's Party was established mainly from CUP members or CUP members, however you want to name it. In 1926, elections ended in a victory for the OHF, but many were quick to remark that this was less due to the party itself and more due to fragmentation of the opposition. Where more than a dozen parties fought for any given seat, the newly appointed Grand Vizier did not hide his ambitions, and in a flurry of reforms he pushed the nation towards his ideals. Massive strides were undertaken in the areas of education, economic recovery, and the fight against the religious establishment. The authoritarian style of his Grand Vizier, however, led to a further splintering of the party when his former ally and friend Kazım Karabekir Pasha broke with the party and created his Democratic Party. Under the threat by the rapid centralization of the government apparatus, and with many conservatives afraid that the OHF may be attempting to break with the tradition, the 1931 elections ended in the first electoral defeat for the OHF. The Ottoman Party for Administrative Decentralization, under its leader Hakkı el-Azam, became the grand winner of the elections and formed a coalition with the HIF and the DF to provide a united front against the growing centralist threat. The coalition, however, was under constant attack as various parties that played part in it had conflicting opinions on a non-OHF policy. Tensions reached a breaking point in late 1932 when the government of Hakkı el-Azam collapsed due to disagreement with the HIF and DF. A new government was created under HIF leadership, but as a minority government failed in achieving its goals of decentralization and liberalization. The continued failures by this coalition went a long way in preparing the reputation Majority 1935 elections. As Grand Vizier Mustafa Kemal Pasha begins his second term in office, signs have started to appear that he may be looking for an alternative to the constant obstruction by the Ottoman Chamber of Deputies and interference from conservative lobbies through the Caliph. Interesting. So, boys and girls, it has been 35 minutes already, and I don't want to start now, so I think I'll leave a text at the start of this video that I'm not doing any game content, but just doing blah blah in this part. So let us end this episode here. We'll start playing the game in the second episode. So see you there.